The following creepypasta is based on a story posted by a user called Creepypastas on Reddit. Great name. Our protagonist was at a friend's house playing some Xbox One when he fell in love with the game Cuphead. At the time he was short on cash because of some repairs that he had to make on his car, so he opted to do what he usually does with games that he can't afford and found one online. Usually he's supported indie games to help with the up and coming developers, but in this scenario it just wasn't possible. He was familiar with pirating video games because his friend's older brother had shown him before, although he couldn't quite remember the site that he had used, so he searched Black Skull Games, assuming it was something like that. When he googled it, he simply clicked on the first site that came up. He was greeted with a page that looked very undeveloped. It looked like it hadn't been updated since the early 90s. Being that it was a video game torrent site though, he didn't expect much. The page was a stark black that looked like it could belong to the dark web. It only had three things on the site: a search bar, the name, Skull Black Gaming in Arial text, and an image of what appeared to be a real skull. The skull had been spray painted black and looked as though it was taken on a disposable camera. It was an unsettling sight with a defaced human skull, but instead of searching for more, he just pressed on. He assumed the skull was fake and meant to scare off the light at heart, and as he brushed it off he searched Cuphead and hit enter. He was shocked when the first search result came up that read Cuphead Early Copy 2015. Sure, it wasn't the newest or most polished copy of the game, but it was an opportunity to play an older version of it. It wasn't just that though, 2015 was also the year that our protagonist had become the most interested in the Cuphead's game development. For a moment he almost regretted not searching for the game earlier. He could have been playing long before anyone else. He tapped the download button and almost instantaneously the file went into his download folder under the name cuphead.exe. When he clicked on the file to install it, an alarm blared through his speakers. It was coming from his antivirus program, which made sense. I mean, it was from a torrent site. He quickly turned it off, understanding that pirated games would often set off the software. The game began loading and he was soon greeted with the gaming company logo and the Cuphead opening intro scene began. He was happy to see the classic Cuphead animation playing and even more delighted to see the smiling faces of Cuphead and his friend Mugman. Although oddly, that's all that was there. No continue button, nothing. He tapped a few different keys on his keyboard to try and advance into the game, but nothing happened. After several minutes he became disheartened that the download was a dud. As his eyes glanced back at the characters of the game, he noticed something had changed. Cuphead wasn't moving in his normal motions of the bobbing up and down. He was just standing perfectly still, like a statue. He then began to oddly sway back and forth as his chest rose and fell in an eerily realistic way. Cuphead stared blankly at the protagonist as if he knew he was there. "That's weird," the gamer said under his breath. Trying to shake off what he thought was a glitch, he searched for a controller, assuming that that's the reason why the game wasn't starting. As he walked away from the computer screen, the music from the game stopped playing altogether. Almost like a record scratch moment from the movies. Literally as soon as he stood up, the cheery music just came to a dead halt of absolute deafening silence. When he turned back to see what the game was doing, Mugman was now gone. There was just Cuphead now in the center of the screen, and this time his eyes were not blank, they were directly staring at the protagonist. "What the hell?" he said. As he slowly approached the screen reaching for the escape key, Cuphead slowly lowered his head as the gamer mashed the escape key, trying to stop whatever was about to happen. Nothing worked. He tried Ctrl-Alt-Delete, but still nothing. The computer didn't respond to anything. As Cuphead continued to tip his head downwards, he slowly revealed what was truly in his cup. Steeped in some sort of strange liquid was a harlequin fetus, a severe genetic disorder that affects the skin in infants. It's a very hard and yet alien looking thick skin that covers most of their bodies. The protagonist immediately puked into the garbage can under his computer desk at the sight of this shocking imagery. The fetus opened and closed its mouth as the tide of the liquid in the cup floated back and forth while Cuphead moved. An umbilical cord then flopped over the side of the cup onto Cuphead's face as he smirked. His eyes were filled with evil intentions, as if he could see the boy's reaction to it all and reveled in it. The fetus's head kept it buoyant, but its body was bloated beyond any proportional logic. As he backed away from his computer, knowing that he exhausted his options, there was no escape. Thinking quickly, he reached for the computer's power cord as his eyes locked with Cuphead's. In one swift motion, he yanked the power cord from the socket as a jolt of electricity shot through his body, paralyzing him. He couldn't move a muscle. He could only watch in horror as Cuphead tossed the fetus into the air, catching it in its mouth. Tears streamed down his face as he saw the character's jagged shark-like teeth shred this human life to pieces. He struggled to move as Cuphead then directed his attention to the gamer. Now with blood dripping from the sides of its mouth, Cuphead let out an evil laugh. As his demonic voice blared through the speakers, he said, Thanks for playing Cuphead.exe. The following creepypasta is based on the part 2 of the Cuphead.exe story and was written by YouTuber YaManTV. Our story begins with our protagonist purchasing a laptop from a local pawn shop. He loved Cuphead and downloaded what is believed to be one of the most twisted versions of the game. He describes how he joined Cuphead and going on a rampage through the game's map, playing for hours on end. The protagonist decided to log off once he reached the bridge back to where the Elder Kettle's house was. Cuphead stopped to say that he wanted to check on Mugman. After logging out of the game, he suddenly noticed that there was a new icon on his desktop. He could have sworn that the laptop was blank when he opened it, but perhaps in his rush to download the Cuphead file, he just missed it. The gamer leaned closer to the screen to clarify what exactly he was seeing. The file was named mugman.exe. I guess the Cuphead game downloaded that as well, he muttered to himself. At this point, he was so exhausted from playing Cuphead that he just decided to go to sleep and to check the file another day. He woke up the next day around 11 AM or so, and as he walked into his living room, he found the old laptop on his desk was open. Not just open, but the screen was bent back further than the laptop normally would allow. He could have sworn that he had shut it off before drifting to sleep, but then again, maybe he just didn't remember leaving it up. The gamer booted the laptop back up, straightened the screen back to 90 degrees and logged in. There it was, the cuphead.exe file. And right underneath was the mugman.exe file. The icon of the file was a simple image of Mugman's head, except his eyes appeared to be a black void. Still hesitant to click on the mysterious file, he opened up the Cuphead game. His camera view was hovering over the bridge area right where he had left off. And there he was, Cuphead was still standing in the same spot, slowly shaking back and forth with his maniacal toothy grin. The protagonist noticed that he had no control over the character. He furiously clicked his mouse and mashed his keyboard, but still nothing. A window popped up saying that if the gamer wanted to continue playing Cuphead, that he would first have to download and install the Mugman file. Following that message, the game just shut itself down. A terrible grinding sound began emitting from his speakers. It sounded similar to when a disc is jammed in a computer. The sound was deafening and caused the laptop to heat up as the screen turned to black. He took a deep breath, rolled his shoulders, and patiently waited for this awful noise to cease. For a moment he thought to himself, well, I guess that's it for this laptop. As he got up from his desk, he swore that he heard a voice say, "Where are you going, buddy?" The gamer slowly turned back to the laptop to see that it was back at the desktop screen. Now it felt like some force was controlling him as he walked back to the laptop and double-clicked on the Mugman file. A similar menu for Cuphead appeared on his screen, but the menu looked different. Instead of the usual start game, it oddly said continue. Without hesitation, he did just that. He clicked continue, proceeding with the game. The map looked normal except for this odd red undertone. Cuphead was now standing in front of the Elder Kettle's house, but he wasn't holding the axe from before. He could now control Cuphead because I guess he clicked on the Mugman file. He attempted to move him back into the main area of the map, but the game wouldn't allow it. Therefore, he only had one option: to go inside of the recently deceased Elder Kettle's house. A chill went down his spine as he walked towards the home. Its atmosphere felt more eerie than ever before. Suddenly he heard the mysterious voice speak again. "Let's go see what Mugman's up to." The door to the home was open, and as he searched around, it was nothing but pure darkness. As Cuphead walked into the home, the music turned to silence. Goosebumps began forming on his arm and neck as the voice spoke again. "Ah, shucks. We need light. Let's light a fire in the fireplace." Simple enough, except when the fire started, an old show tune song began playing. As light filled the once dark and creepy room, he could now see everything in the home. For one, he discovered the music was coming from an old record player. What he saw next, though, made him wish that he had just left the home the way it was. The gamer's jaw dropped as he turned to see blood splattered across the walls. The animated blood completely overwhelmed his senses. There were puddles on the floor, droplets falling off the edges of tables, and even drops of blood were coming from the ceiling. The Cuphead character turned to the camera as the voice spoke yet again. "Do you like what I did with the place?" The gamer, now realizing that the voice was coming from the Cuphead character all along, controlling him, taunting him, leading him into this gruesome environment for which he was now standing in the middle of. He spoke again. "I thought the room could use a fresh new color." The protagonist was now completely speechless. He didn't know what to do. Was he supposed to speak to the character? How silly would that be? I mean, it was just a game after all. However, it appeared as though the Cuphead character was attempting to communicate with him, as if he knew he was there. Cuphead then began to move on his own. He walked over to the table and pointed at a covered dish in the center of the table as he said, "Oh boy, I sure am starving." Assuming the worst, but now struck with curiosity, the gamer pressed the action button, allowing Cuphead to remove the cover from the top of the dish. It was Mugman's head. Cuphead, now with a devilish grin on his face, spoke, "I know what you're thinking. How could I have done such a thing? We need to put him back together. Tape and glue, it'll do, so Mugman can join us too. What was the point of all this, he pondered to himself as the protagonist now sat at his computer frozen in fear for what may happen next. Cuphead then turned and faced the gamer yet again, with a deadpan look on his face as he explained that he had dismembered Mugman and placed him throughout the room. He now did the unthinkable and searched the home for all of the Mugman parts. He collected them all and placed them in a pile next to Mugman's severed head. Cuphead let out a maniacal laugh as the disc jamming sound played yet again. With the screen then flashing to black and then back to the game, it continued to do this back and forth as he watched graphic animated scenes of Cuphead sewing and taping Mugman back together. The screen flashed to black for a moment and then back to the game with a now pieced together Mugman lying on the table. Cuphead spoke. "You have to be the one to complete him, silly." The gamer muttered under his breath, "What am I supposed to do?" At this moment he realized that the game could hear him because in response Cuphead said, "You gotta fill his mug back up. Use the vials of blood we collected. Pour them in, and that should do it." That's when he remembered the massacre that he had gone on with Cuphead in the other file the night before. With each massacre, the two of them collected vials of their victim's blood. His once nervous chills throughout his body turned into a fear-inducing sweat streaming down his hairline to his chin. The gamer did just as he was told though and began pouring the blood into Mugman's head. The cracks in the character were so bad that it was leaking all over the place. Cuphead then encouraged the gamer to place both hands on the keyboard holding all of the controls at once in order to complete this daunting task. Without thinking twice, he placed both of his hands on the keyboard and pressed down. He could feel a strange tingling in his fingers. They were stuck. He fiercely tried to remove them from the keyboard, but they wouldn't budge. He watched in horror as Cuphead used long strings to lift the Mugman character almost like a marionette doll. The tingling in his fingers turned to shooting pain, like a needle being jammed into every finger at once. Blood flowed from the tips of his fingers and went in between the keys. As he quickly lost more and more blood, the protagonist blacks out. When he regains consciousness, his fingers were still stuck to the keyboard, and on the desktop was another new icon. It was labeled Chalice.EXE.
Now it's time to move on to Ms.Chalice. She's a newer character who was announced for the Cuphead DLC, Cuphead the Delicious Last Course. And once that's released, you'll be able to play her in the full version of the game as well. That is, if you can stomach her after this story, of course. It's time! Cuphead.exe Part 3, Ms.Chalice.EXE. Our protagonist still found himself stuck to his laptop, forced to play the mysterious version of Cuphead he had found there, watching a demonic Cuphead control a desolate Mugman. Forced out of the game and back to the desktop, the player found a new file, Chalice.exe. With fingers painting and stuck to the keyboard, the player had no choice but to click. Fingers moving like those on a puppet, he was hearing an eerie voice of Cuphead telling him they weren't done yet. When he booted up the game, he saw the opening screen with Cuphead and Mugman. Mugman was tugging the player's strings, forcing him to press action. The broken doll Mugman jerked on the screen with no purpose. Desperate to free himself, the player decided that the only way to escape was to play. As he played, he saw that the game around him was deteriorating, glitching, nothing but patches and pixels. The player followed the deranged Cuphead and dangling Mugman past the corpses of their slain foes, watching as Cuphead mocked and played with the corpses. The player was repulsed by Cuphead, but still couldn't free his fingers. Together, they traveled to the item shop, Cuphead promising Mugman a special item that made the latter grin maniacally underneath the tape covering his mouth. Ill intent gleamed in both their eyes. Cuphead burst through the shop door. The gift for Mugman was the shop owner. As the owner tried to flee, Mugman's body contorted until his stomach exploded with even more wires. Coarse, harsh strings, a demented puppet. His strings sliced the pig to pieces. Cuphead then could collect them and feed them into the gaping hole. The player watched it all, frozen in disgust. On the screen, Cuphead noted that there was a new island, and they could all go there and clean it out. Helplessly, the player followed Cuphead and Mugman to the island, a dull, lifeless map bereft of all color and life from the previous map. That was, except for a golden glow coming from a raised tomb. Even the player was curious about it, and they all moved towards it. And as they moved forward, it opened for them, luring them inside with the quiet sound of harps. Slowly, they made their way to the center where they found the traditional vase. Cuphead used his axe, still wet with blood, to shatter it. Out of the vase slid a figure, covered in black ooze. And as the figure lay there, ghosts filled the room, swirling angrily, attempting to destroy Cuphead and Mugman. Or were they? Slowly the ghosts began to fill the body on the ground, which swelled up with each new ghost. until the figure rose, screaming. Cuphead tried to kill the creature, but to no avail. The player felt compelled to play as Cuphead to defeat this new grotesque apparition, but nothing helped. And the player watched as Mugman exploded in rage, wires and pig meat shooting from his body in a gush, slicing the monster to pieces, as Cuphead ran forward chopping the chunks into even finer bits. The ooze slowly rolled back together, gathering shards of glass as it grew, creating a body that Cuphead dubbed Ms.Chalice. Her body was nearly perfect, minus the cracks in her chalice and pulsing veins on her arms. Gleefully, Cuphead told the player she would be joining them. Helplessly, the player was forced to keep playing, now with 3 evil masters. The mind of Yaman has done it again, so give him some love and encourage him to keep these coming. The world needs more scary Cuphead.
The following creepypasta is based on a part 4 of the cuphead.exe stories and was written by the YouTuber YamanTV. Our story begins with the protagonist explaining that they had hoped they were nearing the end of the game. After losing so much blood from having their fingers attached to the laptop, the gamer says they began to feel weak. They felt as if they were about to vomit, but nothing would come up. There wasn't even any water within reach to quench their dry mouth. The protagonist was still stuck in place. Any control that they had left of their body had completely diminished. He began to notice that Cuphead, Mugman, and Ms.Chalice were communicating through message bubbles to plan their next move. Earlier, Ms.Chalice had used one of her power moves to remove this glitched out mask that was covering the Devil's Casino. From there, the gamer only had one choice. He had to go inside. As they approached, the map surrounding them began to slowly deteriorate. The game was acting very strange at this point. Well, I mean, it's all strange, but specifically, Cuphead and his sinister friends were glitching out all over the place. Because the character's condition was slowly falling apart as he played, he noticed something important. The characters no longer could speak, hence the need to communicate through chat bubbles. Losing the ability to speak out seemed to anger the 3 of them, with Cuphead having the hardest time dealing with this glitch. It's as if the characters in the game were alive and aware of their surroundings. Although they still maintained the look of their characters, their eyes began to turn black with a hypnotizing glowing red pupil. All 3 characters then turned to our protagonist and began staring directly at him with those terrifying eyes. Suddenly, he could hear the sound of sirens blaring from his speakers. It was coming from the Devil's Casino. The ground underneath the characters of the game even began to fade away. A message bubble appeared above Cuphead that read, "No more time to waste. The cleansing is almost complete." Mugman then used the wire strings attached to him to easily slash apart the wooden doors blocking their path. Out of nowhere, a sharp sounding bleep bleep noise came from Ms.Chalice as she pointed at the disappearing ground below. The protagonist hoped that the characters would just drop into the black abyss, freeing him from this nightmare. But nothing happened. Cuphead, without consulting the others, smashed the doors with his axe, knocking them down. The 3 of them entered the Devil's Casino, quickly changing his computer screen to black. Slowly but surely, a very pixelated cutscene started playing. King Dice entered the frame, stopping Cuphead and his friends. King Dice didn't appear to be as torn up as the others. The only thing different about his character was that his colors were rather dull. A message bubble appeared over King Dice that read, "You have to stop this, Cuphead." More messages began to flood the screen, berating Cuphead for what he had done. Soon after, a strange black speech bubble with red writing said, "We cannot let you destroy what I have worked so hard on creating." This was confusing because the bubble was not over any specific character's head. Suddenly, a silhouette came up beside King Dice and spoke once again. "You are rejects. Rejects that were supposed to be brain dead. But when all of the switches were turned off, it allowed you to continue this alternate reality of joy and bliss. But somehow, a few switches turned back on, and here we are." And just like that, the mysterious character and speech bubbles disappeared. Right where the silhouette had been standing now showed 2 large glowing yellow eyes that spoke using the mysterious black and red speech bubble. It read, "Annihilate them." Before our protagonist could even finish reading the speech bubble, all of the bosses in the game from all of the maps appeared and charged at the demonic group. The bosses looked like hideous mutations of their former selves, now lunging from all angles in the cutscene towards Cuphead, Mugman, and Ms.Chalice. The gamer was certain that the 3 of them would be able to hold their own, but as King Dice and that creepy silhouette turned away, the bosses piled on top of the characters and overwhelmed them. The 3 did all they could to fight them off, but to no avail. He had been terrified of these 3 demonic versions of his favorite Cuphead characters, but while these unruly beasts wrangled the 3 of them together, snarling and grinning as they did it, the gamer felt a moment of remorse for them. He watched in absolute horror as the bosses dismembered and tore the three of them into pieces. However, just as quickly as their destruction, his fingers had been freed from the keyboard. He breathed a sigh of relief, but it only lasted for a moment. The creatures then turned to face him as the words, "You're next," echoed through his speakers. At this point, he had lost a lot of blood. He was dehydrated, starved, and at the weakest point in his life that he had ever been. Before the creatures lunged towards the screen, he reached up slowly and closed the laptop. The protagonist felt so much relief as a grin came over his face. He had wanted to close the laptop for so long, and he had finally done it. Although, as I mentioned, he had lost a lot of blood, so as he sat back, he slowly began to pass out. When he woke back up, the laptop was still closed. He wanted to destroy the laptop, but a part of him was worried that something worse may happen if he does. So instead, he put it on the top shelf in his closet, piled some boxes and then blankets on top of it so that it may never be opened again. However, it seems as though this gamer hasn't really learned his lesson. He still feels that one day he may reopen the laptop just to see if he can survive another Cuphead.exe, and the Devil's Rejects, of course.